So I was talking to a friend of mine who was getting quotes to build a loft in their home. And the way it was working was crazy for them. I mean, they didn't know anything about construction. They had no background in or any experience in any architecture or any field engineering that would cause them to feel like they understood what was about to happen to their house by putting a loft in. They had really tall ceilings, and they just knew that, when the stairs came up, they wanted to extend out the floor, and then they wanted to put a little office up there. And so they started calling companies that would come out and, a general contractor or an architecture firm. They would come out and they'd look at the scene, and then they'd quote them. And so I was talking to my friend. I said, "Well, how's it going?" And they said, "Well, we had several people come in and give us bids, and there was a couple that were really low, and there were a couple that were really high, but almost everybody kind of clumped into a middle." Now, I didn't know anything about the process. I didn't know who they'd talk to. I didn't know how those companies had priced. But I can be pretty sure that most of them were using roughly what is a cost-plus methodology to pricing, that they were taking what would it cost us to do it, and then let's tack on some margin, and this is roughly where we think the number should be. And sometimes people do that, but as they're walking into your home and they're checking things out, they're pushing it up or down a little based on what they are seeing in the context of who their customer is. I use that setting and scenario to talk to people about value-based pricing a lot, mostly because I try and highlight what value-based pricing is not. See, some people, they hear the term value-based pricing, and what they think is it's a shortcut to getting more money, right? It's a shortcut to raising prices. I'll use the phrase value-based pricing when I'm talking to, the people around me. I'll use that phrase, and when I talk to my customer, I will talk about the value that I'm delivering, and then I'll charge more. That's not value-based pricing. It's using a buzzword or a catchphrase, but it's not value-based pricing. See, value-based pricing isn't about you talking about your value. Value-based pricing isn't you feeling more valuable and therefore pricing higher. Value-based pricing is finding the right price for the right value that's delivered when that value is appreciated and understood by a customer. Now, different customers have a different perception of what that value is. In the case of this loft, my friend got all these different bids, didn't know anything, had no background, but when they all kind of landed in a clump around one number, right, one basic number, they thought, is it worth it or not? And what they were asking was, does this fit within my particular perspective of what I find value? Like, would I spend that money on it? And to them, that middle number made sense. Now, I want you to imagine for just a second that another vendor came in. I want you to imagine that someone showed up and said, listen, when we finish adding this loft, what we're going to find is that you have more square footage, and we've analyzed your neighborhood, and more footage means more value for your property. In fact, your property is going to appraise at $60,000 higher. And because of that, rather than where everybody else is anchored at about 15 grand, we would like to split the difference between you. The 60 grand of value that's going to be created, you take 30, we take 30. And so they were willing to charge twice as much because the value that was created in the work they were doing. I can tell you what my friend would say. My friend would say, you're smoking. There's no way I'm going to give you 30 when everybody else is talking about 15, only because you're trying to connect your price to some value you perceive I may get, even though I don't find the value in that. You see, when we talk about value, we can't just talk about, as a vendor, we determine the value we're giving that customer, and therefore we price appropriately. The value here is not a value that we determine. It's a value a customer determines. And more often than not, that value is determined long before they show up to have a conversation with you. See, in that scenario, if someone showed up and said, I'm going to charge 2x what everyone else is charging because the value of your property is going to go up because you have more square footage, I don't think it would get a play. But I want you to imagine a different scenario. I want you to imagine that another extra vendor walked in and said, "Can I ask you a question? What is this loft going to be used for?" And instead of saying an office, the family said, "Well, we're bringing my mother, the kid's grandmother, to stay with us, and we want a place where she can connect and whatever." And imagine if that builder said, why are you doing a loft? I mean, that means that your mother has to climb all the stairs to get here. And they might say something like, "Well, we didn't know where else we could put it. This is the only space we have." And he says, "Well, let me take a look at something." And he goes and he walks around the property and he checks out part of the fence line and where things are at. And he comes back, he says, "Now this is a little different, but I want to give you another option. Off your living room here, there's a spot here where we could open a door, right? And we could build a room over here. You'd get about the same square footage. The layout would be different, and there's gonna be a slightly different cost because of how we have to set this up in terms of foundation and the ground there, and how far apart from the fence line we have to be. But if we do it, it will cost a little bit more, but it'll also put your mother right near the living room where the family hangs out, and she won't have to climb any stairs. In fact, for a little bit more, we can attach a bathroom directly to that property if we do it the right way. Now that would be an extra cost again, but that way she could have her own bathroom connected to her room, and she wouldn't have to even walk across the house to get to the guest bathroom downstairs. Oh, God, if they said that to my friend, right? My friend might change the price tag he's willing to spend because of the value that was just created. Because he said, "Well, this is the intention of what I plan to use it for. I have a value for my mother." By the way, that value for my mother was created long before anyone ever showed up to talk to me about an addition, right? That value and what I care about and how I think about and what I'm willing to spend on my mother is different than you showing up and telling me that the value of my house is going to appraise, because I don't care about that. I'm not moving, so I'm not selling, so I'm not actually benefiting from that value creation. But put my mom in a place where she doesn't have to go up and down the stairs. I may have to go to the doctor less, and she can go to the bathroom right next to her own bedroom. Oh, that's a lot of value. And guess what? It's going to cost more than the 15. It may cost up to the 30. And in fact, because we've added a bathroom and everything else, you might add a larger bathroom with a larger shower that has, you can start getting into this whole space of all the ways I'm adding value and I'm pricing appropriately. And I'm doing it in such a way where the customer says, "I'm willing to spend all that money and more." Value-based pricing is not a cheap way and a quick way to just raise my rates. Value-based pricing isn't a way for me to articulate what the value should be to you. And especially when it comes to websites, I don't run up to you and tell you your website's going to be worth a lot more and you ought to think about making sure your website's worth a lot more. Websites are worth what they're worth, right? And I'm not trying to get all zen on you, but let's be very clear. A website that generates a ton of revenue for you every single day and yet is doing it on a very small percentage of conversions, and you can increase conversions, that's worth a lot, and I'll invest in that because it's a money-making machine already, and it'll make me more. And a website that barely makes me anything or makes me nothing, my value for that is a lot lower. And that has absolutely nothing to do with who's sitting in front of me and telling me or pitching me on why it should cost them more, right? Because at the end of the day, a customer defines the value. And your job, if you're going to use value-based pricing, your job is to do the hard work and the research to figure out where that value sits.